Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Hendrickson. It is my pleasure to welcome you back to the Inclusive Leadership Conference. I would like to thank you for joining us for this afternoon's session, Speak Up, Appropriately Raising a Sticky Issue or Idea. Who here is excited to get started? I see some hellos from Yajara Montero. I see Rosalind Robinson. Hello, Rosalind.
And Asma, who was with us last year. Asma was they were in our session last year when I did a couple sessions at the Inclusive Leadership Conference. It's great to see you back. You will definitely this is going to build upon the conversations last year with a very specific focus. So your perspective from last year building upon this is going to be incredibly helpful and beneficial in the comments today.
Okay, so we are more than excited to welcome you to our breakout session, speaker, Ms. Erica Wexler. Erica Wexler is the president of Erica Wexler Transforms LLC and creator of Transformational Guidance, Training, and Coaching Program. With 20 plus years experience, Erica specializes in communication, leadership development, and change facilitation. She is passionate about empowering people at all career stages to leverage their strengths, elevate engagement, and maximize performance in today's diverse, fast-paced virtual workplace. Erica earned her master's degree in organizational dynamics from the University of Pennsylvania and holds dual certifications in organizational leadership and change management. She is a published author, an avid dancer, a neuro-linguistic programming practitioner, and an accredited LIFO licensee trainer and executive coach. Can I see some excitement in the chat once again?
And get prepared. We'll be using the chat a lot tonight and all in the comments.
So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Erica Wexler.
Good evening. Hi, everybody. It's great to see some familiar names from last year's conference. I was super excited to get an opportunity to come back again tonight as well and share some tips and strategies with you around an issue that has become, or a topic that's become even more relevant, and you coming out into the workforce as emerging leaders have a critical role and an opportunity. So tonight, we're going to be sharing some tips and strategies with you. At the same time, I'm really interested to know what is most important to you. At the end of this, through the resources tomorrow, you'll be getting a copy of tonight's slide deck. So if you want to just stay fully present, of course, if you're a note taker, take your notes. You will also be getting a copy of the slides and a bonus tip sheet with 5 top strategies that I've put together on how to raise an issue, a sticky issue, an idea, or a challenge appropriately in the workplace, with a bunch of bonus ideas that we can't even get to in our hour together. And at the same time, we have a full hour to give you tips and resources as leaders, because I do consider you leaders. Coming into that workforce now, you are already leading yourself, you're leading you're leading others, you're leading by example. So tonight we're going to cover 3 common questions that I have seen, questions I've gotten, challenges that get raised on a regular basis. The first is, I get it all the time, how do you appropriately raise a culture, a climate issue, a social justice issue, or an idea in the workplace? How do you do that professionally? How can leaders diplomatically influence leaders at all stages, emerging leaders, experienced leaders? It's sticky for everybody. How can leaders diplomatically influence a positive culture shift, regardless of their experience, their position, or their role in the organization? And what concrete actions must you take as a leader? And how do you do it? Now, knowing that these are the 3 biggest issues, you're here today and you showed up for a reason. You could have been a lot of places tonight and you're with me this evening having a conversation. I'm super curious. what your biggest question is about raising a sticky issue or idea. What is a tip, a strategy, or a resource that you would like to gain tonight to make sure that you are getting something you need and you can walk out of here going, I know what to do next. Go ahead and in the comments now. Now, just remember, if you do the private chat, I'm going to be the only one who can see it. We would really love for tonight to be fully engaged and community oriented. So answer this question. And now if you don't have your biggest question about raising a sticky issue, consider, all right, let me see what everybody else's questions are, and maybe you'll get inspired by that. If you have a big question, whatever that is, about whatever it is about raising a sticky issue or idea that brought you here tonight, add your question into the chat. Nicoy is going to be helping me with his eagle eye, keeping an eye on those comments. And throughout the session tonight, throughout this conversation, we'll be pausing and we'll be bringing up some of your most important questions to the front so I can answer them here. Now, I may not be able to get to all of them. If there are a ton, I'm going to do my best to cover the most important themes and give you what you need. So go ahead and start adding that into the chat and into the comment section. And while we're doing that, we're going to get started. Which means when you're raising your voice, when you are giving words and actions to an important issue, something sticky, something, what do I even mean by sticky? It's one of those things that has an impact on the other end. It has some challenges. It impacts people. It is related to something that is significant to culture, and you're trying to figure out how to bring it up. So where's the starting point? Well, first, you need to figure out your starting point. Answer this question for yourself. Take a moment and self-reflect. Candidly, honestly, and transparently with yourself, recognizing that today and through this whole conference for 3 days, we're focusing on social justice. We're focusing on allyship, and we're focusing on the intersectionality with leadership. So self-assess your starting point as a leader. How comfortable are you right now with raising a challenge or an idea around sticky issues? Are you extremely comfortable? No, you are going in like, I'm going to raise this. I'm bringing it up. I don't hold back. I'm just going on in. Are you somewhat comfortable, but you'd like to get more comfortable doing it? Are you someone, you're willing to do it, but you're just a little bit uncomfortable with doing it, or you are just extremely uncomfortable? You were raised in whatever way that you just don't like conflict. You would like to avoid the conflict completely. You have no interest in having any conflict. And if you could just go avoid, and you're like, why is this even an issue? Like, let's just avoid the whole thing. Knowing where your starting point is going to help give you some context as we're sharing the strategies tonight and as I'm discussing them. Some of these, if you're super, super comfortable with it, you may need to think about some resources about how to slow down and wait before you speak and gather some data. And think about your approach. If you are on the other end where you are extremely uncomfortable, aim to get at least one idea or one strategy so that you can begin practicing raising some issues around things that are a little less important and have less impact so that you can build the communication habits and begin raising them more purposefully when something really important does come to the surface. You're ready because you've already practiced. So with that said, considering where you are and your lens of listening and engaging tonight so that you can adapt the strategies that are sharing tonight into your current strategy as you get more comfortable and build your leadership approach to raising your voice. Okay. And Nicoy is keeping his eye on all the strategies, so I'll be checking in on that as well and gathering some of the questions that we're already seeing coming in. The first strategy that I can offer you is really just some context. The key to successful leadership today is influence and not authority. This is good news. The good news is that so often you're going to be raising an issue and there's a power imbalance. The power dynamic is not even. You are trying to raise an issue with someone who has more authority than you, more experience than you, has more power than you do, has more official power than you do. And that is something where you're like, how do I navigate that? The good news is that leadership today is about influence. And that means you're in a better starting position. It means that you get to shift your mindset and shift your focus of when you're raising an issue, when you're raising an idea on how to make things better or to help do things differently, one conversation at a time. You're shifting your approach from focusing on respectful of the positional power and the dynamics and where you're going on the org chart. And if you're down here and kind of new into the field versus someone who's up here, positional power can be a benefit, but it's not where you start. It's a shift of focusing on relational power, on really thinking about the relationships that you have with anybody else within the dynamic and the situation. And that is something you can start building. And I'm going to give you some strategies about how to do that. Before we jump into the relationship building strategies, the number one, if you walk away with nothing else tonight, it's going to be about how to adopt the mindset of an influencer. A leader is an influencer. My colleague, Charity Hughes, who also teaches at Temple, it talks about how leadership is all about negotiation. Sometimes you are negotiating processes. Sometimes you are negotiating outcomes or budgets or systems, but you are always negotiating relationships. And that mindset, that influencer's mindset, is so critically important. One of the ways that when you are negotiating those relationships, when you are really considering how to adapt an influencer's mindset, are two strategies. So take a look at these images on here. The first is a set of stairs. We want to fix everything right now. If you are one of those doers, you're like, I see social injustice, there should be diversity, we need to get this piece. The one thing to keep in mind is that change sometimes takes time. And if you are looking at this in the long term, you want to take that approach where you're doing this one conversation at a time and consider the influence, consider the changes that you're looking to help to facilitate, the changes that you're looking to help make as one step at a time with a stairway that's going to take a little while to go up and down and back and forth, and then you just keep climbing forward. The second approach to an influence mindset is to be water. Now, a couple of you who were with me last year at the 2020 conference have heard this before, so I'm going to reinforce it, that be water, my friend, that Bruce Lee has talked about, with the focus on when water runs into an issue, it doesn't stop. When you think about water, it never loses itself in the process. It just keeps moving and it wears things down over time. It's got to adapt. It's got to be flexible. It's got to figure out a different situation. And an influencer with that mindset is like, I'm going to be like water. When water runs into a rock, it doesn't stop moving. It runs into a barrier. It runs into an obstacle. It runs into a culture issue. It finds a way over and around and under and through. It doesn't get mad at the rock and start yelling at the rock. It finds a way to wear it down so that over time, as you're building through that stairway, over time, it's the mountain that changes until you eventually form the Grand Canyon. We are looking at justice. We are looking at change. We are looking at societal change in the short term of what needs to happen, but with a long-term mindset. And it's going to take you as a leader to influence that change one conversation at a time. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a checkbox. Social justice at the whole conference, it's more than a hashtag. It is an action. Diversity is an action. Leadership is an action. Equity is an action. Everything that we are looking to do and change to make this place comfortable for everybody is an action, not a position. And this will be really important for you to know, because as your leaders, you're going to be in very different positions where you come in on an official chart in organizations, depending what field you go into and when the industries you work through. Regardless of that, we're going to focus on those relationship pieces, which is here. There is only one way to get anybody to do anything, and that is by making the other person want to do it and not putting them in a corner where there's resistance back and forth. Now, that's where the coming in and taking time starts. So we're going to be strategic. And I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to check in with Nikoi and pause for just a moment to get a couple of, he's going to choose a question and pop it up for me to answer right off the bat. while Nicoy is checking in and scanning for the right question to start with right now, I'm going to put this in for you. And I have a question for you. Be strategic. What needs to be considered before raising an issue or an idea? There's some things that have to happen first. So if you're that go-getter and you're just jumping in, here you go. If you're the kind of person who's already going to be more thoughtful, here's your plan. We're going to hit upon 3 things tonight. The first thing that needs to be considered before raising an issue or idea are the relationships. We're going to explore that quite a bit. Everything's about relationships. The second is your method or approach. Not every method and approach is going to work in every situation. Got to be strategic. And timing. Timing is key. And as you're listening tonight, I've got a story to share with you as we go through too. I've got a very concrete real world example that happened this year on a very sticky culture diversity issue with a organization that had to be raised this year. So I'm going to be giving you some concrete examples and threading the story through as we go through these strategies coming forward. So before we launch into that, I'm going to check in and just see what kind of questions we may have. So Nicoy, if you've got a question that you'd like to pop up and blow up for us today on the first question that our folks would like me to answer today, I'm going to keep my eye open for that. And I'm looking here too about this. I'm not seeing any questions yet, correct?
I haven't seen any questions.
All right.
I can ask a quick one to get it started.
Sure. Well, if not, I've got the 3. I've got tons of questions that are going to get answered along the way. So, but if you've got one yourself, what's your question?
Okay, so what if you're on a lower level, but then you have someone above you?
Oh, yes.
The people listen to you or are guided by you more than they're guided by who is above you. How do you maneuver in a situation like that?
Are you the one raising a sticky issue to the person who is the supervisor, or is it a supervisor, or is there somebody who's just higher up that the issue needs to be raised to them?
It would be like a hierarchical situation where there's like a supervisor or a manager up here, and then everyone below is just junior level. So there's no intermediary person between those 2 levels.
And the question is how to raise the issue to that supervisor.
Yeah, because everyone is listening to a particular person that's on their same level, and they feel more comfortable raising those issues there. So then how does that person take it up?
Well, I'm going to give one strategy. I'm going to jump ahead, and this is something I do all the time, and say, consider who would be the right person on that team to raise that issue. So there are a couple of pieces. Are you the person who always needs to be the person raising that issue, or do you want to encourage other people? So if it's someone's specific issue or idea, you need to consider who is the best person who would be able to raise that person. So what's the relationship? I'm going to go back to the relationship piece. In fact, let's just jump into that, because this next piece on relationships is going to answer your question. And I'm going to answer it in a couple different ways as we go through. The first will be, who is the person who really does need to bring that up? And it's going to be based on who the relationships are with. So my first answer to you is, check your relationship status. So all the people on that team where they're listening and they're engaging, and who on that team, what's the relationship status for each of those people with that supervisor? What's the relationship status with each person on that team? Those respectful relationships need to be established way before that issue or idea is raised at work. So really taking the time to get to know one another's strengths, to take the time to not just jump in and always talk about only the work. Now, this is tricky, especially in the virtual space right now. You have to work a lot harder to build those relationships before they're needed. So my first answer to you, Nicoy, would be, and to others who are thinking of it, because this does come up all the time. I will say one of the tricky things, if you are the person who's comfortable raising your voice, lots of people will come to you and try to put you in the position to raise your voice. You do need to make a decision about whether or not you want to. Is that your issue to raise? Is that where you want to cash in your political chips? And when I say that, it means if you're always the one bringing things up, you could also be putting yourself in a little bit of jeopardy. So you want to make sure that is someone else just using you because they don't really want to, and they're just going to put you in that position because you're always willing to. and then encouraging them to be the ones to raise their voice? Or is this something in the situation that you or that other person really does have the strongest relationship with that supervisor, really has the strongest relationship to bring it up, because they might have to take it to the next level and take it to the next level. So there may be a positional power consideration, but the first step is check that relationship status to see who starts. My second question to answer to that is to be strategic. Consider what strategies you're going to use with different people and in different situations. So it's also going to go back to what situation you're trying to raise. If it's within your purview, if it's a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue that you're seeing, you might raise it differently with that supervisor than you might with someone who's a peer where you're seeing something sticky happening. And maybe you can crowdsource. I'm going to start by giving you a bit of an example. And then I'm going to start about where these relationships come in and how to be a bit strategic about this, so I can give you something that actually has happened recently. I have an organization. I do a lot of training and a lot of culture, and I speak a lot about the inclusion and creating inclusive conversations and creating inclusive cultures and the leadership piece. And some of you were with me for those conversations last year. And with that said, I've been working with a client. And with that client, they have a young emerging leader who has a position with lots of other people around them on the piece. And this particular leader had an opportunity to do some data and some needs assessment and some numbers and got all kinds of different issues. And over the last couple of years has really been a culture champion for their organization. And out of that came this idea to develop a new leadership program based upon the issues and the culture and how to raise all these different topics, right? Raising issues and empowering them and creating really fantastic leadership development opportunities. And this young leader was super excited, and they decided to do an application process. So all these different people in the organization, all the supervisors, the ones who had positional power, nominated different leaders within the organization who they saw as having lots of leadership potential and who they wanted to groom for going through that strategic career pathway. It was very exciting. And this particular person, being a culture champion, is always thinking about the diversity and the equity and ensuring that the process was equitable and that the program itself ended up with as much diversity as we were going to present with it, that my team and I were going to train. And there was a lot of excitement until we met more recently last month to look at the list of who was chosen for the program. And I was looking at this list and I asked this person a question. I said, what's the background and makeup of this group? And every single person who had been selected for participation in this emerging leader development program was white. And every single person who was not chosen for this was a person of color. And the leader whose project this was, it didn't make sense. It was a misalignment. It didn't align with any values that I had heard. And I asked my question before I jumped in and started making comments or laying blame. I asked a question. So I was considering what strategies I would use with this particular person to gauge the situation. Now I had to gauge my relationship with this person, which was really strong. And I had to consider what I already knew about this person, which was this person's a culture champion and has brought different culture issues up and is asked a lot of questions about how to get more comfortable doing so. So I asked about it. And then I asked another question about, well, what was the criteria used and when decisions were made? And I uncovered a story that this particular person wasn't part of the decision-making process. This particular person had this taken away because people higher up decided there's new leadership, there's new this, and the executive team decided to make the decision. And the executive team had lots of great ideas for who was chosen in this program, and they did different pieces. And it wasn't that the people chosen for the program didn't deserve it. They were all amazing. The people chosen for the people weren't using a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. They were thinking about bottom line. They were thinking about strategy. They were thinking about performance. They were thinking about productivity. And they missed the piece about this. And I knew this is going to create a huge, significant challenge and undermine a lot of the work this person did. And this person was devastated about where things had landed. Now, before I tell you what happens next and what we did next, I want you to consider this. And I'm curious in the comments, what would your reaction have been? What would have been your initial reaction on if you had been invited in this program and you knew these were your values and you knew you were looking at the justice and you had done a lot with leadership and you were in a position, but lots of people higher up in positions had all of a sudden made lots of decisions. And now all of a sudden you were now in a position to see a program that had everything that didn't have diversity or equity in it. What would your immediate reaction have been? Your emotional reaction, your reaction, what would you do and how would you respond? How would you, like, I'm just really curious. So I'm just curious, not knowing where the rest of this is going in the comments. Real story, real challenge, real issue. I'm going to be looking about how do you do that? And Jane, Jana, you are how to remove personal bias when discussing something you're passionate about when they may not be. There's all part of this there, right? So the other people who were there were like, well, this isn't really, should everyone at the CEO of the higher levels be aware of this and thinking of it? Yes. But again, small changes over time. It's not happening right now. So what did we do? What is that initial reaction? Yeah, you would go, okay, so good. Ozma's saying I'd go into defense mode, right? How do we really getting this and the confidence? So Jane is talking about how to get the confidence to bring things up to a superior. How did this leader who was asked to design this program, but then was told who was going to be in the program? What do you think that reaction was? So yeah, it's very good. This, very good. Go to the defense mode right away. Well, there's the, I'm gonna, you get that reaction to these different pieces and to getting frustrated and to wanting to quit and to wanting to not raise it and to just giving up on everything and not having ownership over it anymore. But that not ultimately is going to serve on what you would do in that situation. So we had to just think about, well, what can be done in this situation? How could this person be strategic? So we went through and thought about strategizing your method. And this is one of the strategies I'm sharing with each of you. Strategize your method and approach. So think about the strength of your relationships, build them in advance, and then strategize your method and approach. Who did this need to be raised to and how to do it? If you're speaking to someone very analytical and you're speaking to someone who just focuses on numbers, you definitely want to make sure that you're putting in reasons, statistics, data, facts, logic, and demonstrating expertise. If you're speaking to someone who really needs, you could use the power of story and share an example of what might happen if things go well and what might happen if things do not, and get them to care. Recruit their cooperation in recognizing that a different approach needs to be happen. Play on their self-interests. And then the next one is to get them to come to the realization themselves and get them to think of their idea. And let me tell you how that looks in practice. So in this particular case, we decided to put a quick, what was the right timing? Well, a decision was about to get made. The good news is that the announcement about who was going to be in this program had not been made yet. And there was an opportunity to influence a different outcome and ensure that the final list, even though they thought it was final, the final list did represent the diversity and the talent within this organization. There was an opportunity. There was also, we knew some resistance on the other end because a decision had been made, and why question it when you got C-level fat making a decision? How do you question it? So he thought about this and brought it up to that supervisor, the next supervisor level, and played on their self-interest, which was to help their department look good, to ensure that they weren't getting any lawsuits that were coming in or complaints from the company, and that they also did have the self-interest in helping everybody feel included. So we knew about this person was they understood it. They were also, they like some reasoning. They like to know the expertise. They do like the stories, and they like to be recruited for cooperating. So we framed the story this way. The getting thing was their idea was we began telling the story about the diversity and the equity and how strong this company had been over the past year. We started with the strengths of what had gone well up to this point. We did not just jump into, there's a problem, there's no diversity on this thing, this needs to get fixed. It would have just put everyone on the defensive and it would never have changed. So we had to think about this. So we approached it like water. We softened a little bit and started with what was working. That we'd gotten so much positive feedback from the team and from employees and through the focus groups and the needs assessment. And we used the data that had been collected, and then wrapped it in a story about how much positive change had happened over the last 2 years in their culture, in getting people of different backgrounds to say, this company's doing a good job. Got a long way to go, but we're doing a good job. People are feeling heard. People are feeling included. People are feeling welcome, which isn't always the same thing. Because people had been given the voice to raise issues over the past year, and they had, and people were listening. So in this case, it was telling that story and then transitioning into, so the piece that we wanted to think about with the disconnect is this young leadership program and thinking about who's in it. And before we could go any further, the supervisor went, I know what you're going to say. I didn't see it before. But now that you're telling me to look at these 10 people on Zoom as if they were in a meeting, I know what the issue is. And we asked, well, what is it? What do you see? She said, they're all white. I'm like, yeah. She's like, I didn't see it before. I'm like, there's no judgment. You can't know. You know, Maya Angelou says, when you know better, do better. And if we had gone in with blame, we've gone in with judgment, we've gone in with you should, it would have gotten to the goal that we wanted, which was to ultimately end up with a program that included all the diversity and talent, because there's some amazing talent there. So we recognized this and recognized the lens, and we were able to say, okay, now what? And from that point, it was possible to go in with some ideas and some strategies, and to ensure that the outcome of the program ended up with having people in there that did represent, that it honored the decisions that were made. And then we just decided to expand the program and put more people in, and there will be diversity in the program. Because it was like, okay, what do we do? This is and then giving them some choice. So we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. I'm going to make a decision. This person likes logic, they like data, and they like to make decisions. So we worked on it that way. So with that said, some of the things that needed to happen was setting the stage in advance for that conversation. The meeting invite said, there is a question, a concern, and an idea that needs to be shared with you, and it needs to be shared with you now. And this is what it's, just without too much data, but laying in advance so this person wasn't taken by surprise. That was part of the groundwork. Thinking about what we needed to do that needed to happen, instead of just jumping right into the issue, instead of just jumping right into the idea that needed to be raised. There was a bit of groundwork first about how this ties to their strategy and their plans and the bigger picture and the mission and the company's goals, and then letting that tie into what the issue was first. So the groundwork got laid. And the other thing that I'm going to encourage every single one of you to do is to adopt this influencer's mindset, to adopt a collaborative mindset where you begin the intention of beginning the conversation, maintaining the conversation, and ending the conversation of not talking at each other. No one likes to be talked at. Of not just talking to each other. So I need to speak to this person about the issue. No, I don't need to go talk to that person about the issue. It's, I want to speak with this person about the issue, which means it's a two-way piece that involves listening and questioning and really listening to understand. And that is a big difference when you're taking the influencer's mindset. So really looking at some of these pieces and, you know, like, and what about when the situation's repeating itself? I'm seeing a couple of the questions in the chat too about when the situation, it is going to repeat itself because communication is a habit. Mindsets are a habit. And when it starts to repeat itself, then you will also want to consider how to repeat yourself respectfully and consistently and wear it down like water over a mountain, which can get very tiring, but it's like this repeated message, which is when you hear it over and over. Now, what you may need to do is figure out how to say it once and then drop it in again and then drop it in again whenever there's an opportunity to do so. So they're constantly hearing it until eventually they think it's their idea and it just becomes part of their language. So it's those little small pieces when it's happening over and over and over again. And I'm really sorry to see that when you do end up getting harassed and you have to leave your job, I'm seeing that there are some concrete challenges. There are some organizations that aren't going to be responsive to it, where if they're honoring a person in a leadership position, and the behavior is not held accountable, then you can do what you can. You can ask your questions. You can do the influence. You can do these pieces. Ultimately, you may not be able to influence every single issue in a particular company. I would say it's worth trying first. Like, you don't just quit. The minute one thing happens like this, you don't just quit. If you tried it and you've gone with people or you've checked with human resources and you're trying to wear this down and you're trying to navigate things, and I'm going to share a few strategies here today to say, well, maybe if I had tried this, it might be different. There may be a situation that is just simply toxic, where people are not encouraged or held accountable for being respectful to each other, and what they produce or what they bring in is held more accountable. And that is a larger leadership challenge. So here's what I'm going to suggest. As you are gaining those experiences that are negative, do not let it color your perspective that all companies are like that all leaders are like that. Continue to use your voice in your next career, in your next stage of your career. You've got I want you to look at your career as a long-term path. You will connect with, and in your interviews, ask different questions to help ensure you're ending up in the environment. And the other thing that I'm going to strongly suggest is you are in a position to develop your leadership style. I have also been in positions with people who were not kind, who they was not held accountable, and there was very derogatory. We've all, and I've also had positions that I've either left or been asked to leave because I don't have a lot of tolerance for a lot of that either. So with that said, it has informed my leadership style. It has informed my approach with my team, because you are going to become leaders in different positional powers. You will have an opportunity to use your voice as your career advances. So every experience you have, negative or positive, use it as a learning opportunity to develop your own leadership style. Use it as data, use it as information, use it as power. In those situations, another opportunity that you may have is to flip your perspective, flip that coin. Consider what you would want to know, what you would want to understand about the issue or idea if you were on the other side of the conversation, which can be a little challenging, but there is no what other side of the conversation. Like, it's just right. Like, we should just have diversity in this piece. There should just be, this is just the right thing to do. Really consider, if you were on the other end, what you would want to need to understand about the issue or the idea if you were on the other side. And just remember this, as clear as it is to you about what's right or wrong, as clear as it is to you about where social justice needs to be, about where equity is, about where diversity is, about how people should treat each other, keep in mind, if you haven't noticed anything else, people will take the same situation and see it very differently. And in order to be able to reach consensus or common ground, or to influence things to positive directions, it's simply necessary as a leader to be aware of it. You will be leading teams. You will be leading yourself. You will be leading by following and recognizing that there sometimes are multiple ways to view any given situation. So try to move around the situation and maybe see if they're really out. That person really is only seeing 3 poles instead of 4. And see if you can expand your perspective. Yes, very imperative to those crucial conversations. Absolutely. The other thing that's very important as a leader is to respond versus react. You've got to consider the timing of your message to ensure the greatest chance that your issue is going to be heard, that it's going to be understood, and that the other person knows what they're supposed to do. If all you're doing is raising an issue without a solution or an idea, they may get it and they may hear it, but they may not know what to do with it. So really consider the timing. Is this the right time? When I say timing, there's the time of day, there's the time of week. There's also what else is going on in this person's bandwidth. Like, how busy are they? What does their calendar look like? What is their emotional state? Is it like a Friday when they're trying to get out the door? Timing is often really important. So for example, can you just put 15 minutes on to start the conversation, knowing that they probably have an extra time afterwards and you just want to plant the seed to get them peaked, and then you do it a little later? Do you start the timing of it by laying that groundwork? When is it, or will there be something like a decision's about to get made, a communication's about to get sent? We have to have this conversation right now, because the greatest chance of that issue or idea being changed before that before that list of program participants went out had to happen then because that communication was scheduled for the end the end of that week. So there was time. So you've got to really make sure that you are responding and not reacting, because there's a difference. You want to respond. You want to respond well. You may have to respond quickly, but you don't want to react, because that's sometimes emotional, might shortchange the outcome on the other end. Another strategy in the same piece for you as leaders is to demonstrate that actions and inactions have impact. If you know that something needs to happen and you don't raise your voice, it's going to have an impact. If you're able to demonstrate that by taking action, by making a change, it's going to have a positive impact. But by not taking action and making this change, it's going to have a negative impact. On what? Think about your audience. What do they, I know what you care about. You're like, it has an impact on people. It has an impact on this. It has an impact on that. It's just the right thing to do. Frame it from as many different perspectives as you can for the listener's perspective, because the goal is to influence a positive outcome. So really see if you can demonstrate how that impact is going to happen, taking action or not taking action on people and on budgets, on workload. What are the benefits of having diverse perspectives, of more people, of different pieces, of having equity on the workload, on the culture, on the outcome of projects, on stress level, on intrinsic motivation, on performance, on productivity, which are really big in organizations, on relationships, on opportunities, on processes, and on the organizational reputation. More than a hashtag. We are here at this conference because we saw a lot of companies and organizations who put out their values as a hashtag, but we saw that their people inside that company were not experiencing it in practice. There was a disconnect and a misalignment. And I'm fortunate enough to say that I was also working with companies where there wasn't a disconnect, where they weren't necessarily putting anything out on social media or doing a hashtag, but they were doing the work internally. They were doing unconscious bias, but not only unconscious bias. They were doing culture change and bringing in my team, which is the epitome of diversity, with different perspectives, different genders, different people with different sexuality, different perspectives, everything on the team, so that they were, without having to say it, they just had their different perspectives in there, and they knew that that was the team they needed. So there's a way to demonstrate this and really consider for yourself as a leader, what's the impact? So I'm going to go back to the question Nikoi said also, is like, how do you do that? Well, maybe consider who has the greatest chance of influencing a positive necessary outcome. Maybe it's you, maybe it's not. If an issue needs to get raised, play around and switch the messenger. So I'm going to go back to the what if the same thing happens over and over and over that Hera brought up today, over. Well, have different people say the same thing in a different way, and maybe eventually they'll hear it from someone. Really critically important is that when you are raising a sticky issue or an idea, make sure you're focusing on the change and not the blame. Try to put it on the process and not the people. It's almost always a process issue. Avoid that brainstorming. You want to be brainstorming solutions, aiming for change, brainstorming, that finger pointing. We can see it. We know there's finger pointing. You're doing this. You're not saying enough. You're saying too much. You're not raising your voice. You're raising, like, all of it. It doesn't ultimately help. If anything, it does more damage because it puts people on the defensive. So focus on the change that you are looking to facilitate, the positive change that needs to happen. Should it have been done? Could it have been done? Would you like to see it done? Why are we even having this conversation? Yeah. All right. Pragmatically optimistic. Let's just make this work. One conversation at a time. The finger pointing and the blaming isn't going to get you to where you would like to be in the short term and in the long term, as you're taking that influencer's mindset and aiming as water and going through over time. You can see it. You might recognize it, but it's about how you frame it. The language you use. Start with the strengths and give people the grace to lean in and change gracefully. Maya Angelou, when you know better, do better. They have to be given the opportunity to change. And as a reminder, leadership is action. It is not a position, which means we're taking action. You're putting yourself in those pieces. You are considering what actions you are going to take. You're going to consider what actions you're not going to take. You're going to consider what your method is and what your strategy is. You're going to consider how can you begin to develop relationships before you need them and strengthen relationships with people of diversity. How can you build a network of people who you can bounce ideas off of? Your Temple network, your undergrad network, your graduate network, your mentors, your coaches, your internship supervisors, your instructors, to get the biggest perspective possible so that you can begin practicing. Maybe there's someone who can model how to do this well, and you're watching them. Look for people who you see who are doing this well and pay attention. How are they doing it? What's their body language when they're having this conversation? Are they super sharp and aggressive and leaning in, or are they relaxing a little bit and listening? Are they asking questions? If so, what questions are they asking? How are they influencing a positive outcome respectfully in a way that is a leadership style that you would like to adapt? It matches your own style. And perspective, it's very imperative. I'm really looking with that piece. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of, listen, leadership is not only an action, not a position. It is also an ongoing commitment. An ongoing commitment. I've been in this work for a long time. I taught in Baltimore City public schools and with the students, and I was always working about how can I provide them with more access. And this was been around for a little bit, a long time ago. This has always been something that's been important. And at the same time, this past year, I learned a lot. I spent more time this past year listening than talking, which a lot of you people who have met me may not believe that, but it is possible. I spent a lot of time this past year listening to people who I've known for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And I asked them their stories and their perspective, and they've been guiding me. And I've been trying things out and raising some things up. I don't know if 3 years ago I would have raised the issue to that leader and said, and done the piece the way that we did over this situation, this in these last couple of months on ensuring that leadership program had it. I think I may have shied away from the racial issue. I would have noticed, but I may not have said anything. And that's even just 2 years ago. It is our responsibility when we see things down to get the skills, to speak the truth, to raise our voice, to spread the word, to be bold, to be open, to voice our opinion, and to take a stand on the things that matter to us. And I knew I made a decision this week with that. Like I said, 2 years ago, that's a contract. I could have lost that contract by stepping out of line or bringing something up. But what I did was I was able to use the context of the last year, the more than a hashtag approach, and use that as a starting point for the conversation. And there was no option for me about whether or not to bring up my voice or not. So then it was about the how and what was the relationship and who was the right person to bring it up and what was the right way to do it with this time and in this moment to get the outcome. And it is a strategy. It is a skill. It's not easy. It takes time to develop. And it's something that you want to continually be developing, because sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't. But leadership and action, especially around the topics that we're exploring during this conference, is a daily and ongoing commitment. And it is our responsibility to get comfortable raising our voice, learning how to do it appropriately, and leaning in to be the change that we want to see in the world. Sometimes a quote that's been around for a while is a great quote that we want to stick with. So I'm checking in here too, as we're going through these pieces. There's quite a bit that we've been discussing today. I've got a few more minutes where I left it open to make sure that we can go through, and I want to double check some of the questions. So Nicole, if you're also scrolling through on some of the comments that people are posting and some of the other pieces here, or if you heard something that I said, Nicole, that you'd like me to expand upon or elaborate upon further, I'd be very interested. I want to spend these last few minutes to really ensure that people get the idea, the strategy, of the mindset, something else they need that I may not have covered in our time so far tonight.
Okay, Asma pointed out that perspective is absolutely imperative to having a crucial conversation. She said it takes a lot of effort to learn to see things from several perspectives. And I do agree with that. Thank you for sharing that. Also, Amanda shared that that's a part of our office's philosophy, that leadership is a process and not a position.
Great.
Yeah.
Yes.
I also agree with a lot of the things that you've stated, especially when it comes to knowing you want to speak and always be bold, but you also have to know when to speak and how to bring it across instead of playing the blame game.
Yeah.
I did take some notes as well regarding the water view, which Asma pointed out earlier, that she loved the analogy. So
Well, let me elaborate on that one a little bit, because I mean, I'm actually writing a book right now for, you know, leaders, and I do a lot of work with Temple and a lot of work with universities. And I'm gonna elaborate on that particular analogy. You know, when Bruce Lee, when we talk about be water, my friend, one of the things that you as a leader are going to find is your H2O. If you think about water, it's two H's and an O that are connected together. And you just take lots and lots and lots of H2O and bonds and you put them together and you end up with water. And it takes lots of different forms. So one of the things with a leader with this is also about being flexible and agile and adaptable. And when you think about water and you pour it into a cup, it takes the shape of the cup. And when you think about water and it can be ice and it could be steamy and it can be torrential rain and it can do a lot of damage as a flood. It can be a little chicker and it could be misty. So as you're thinking about your leadership style and you're thinking about how to raise an issue, consider what form of water do you need to be in that situation. If you tend to be a bit misty in general, you're pretty quiet, you like to just observe, you're this. You might need to strengthen your flow. You might need to go less misty and more solid. Doesn't mean you have to be a torrential thing or a hard piece of ice. If you tend to have a very sharp, powerful, dynamic presence, which is very powerful and important. It doesn't mean that you want to hone down who you are, but you may want to soften your voice when you're raising something that's really important and slow it down, because it allows people to lean in and listen. And then it's not that aggressive piece. And other times you may say, it's too important. We are not letting this go. We have to it's too important. And here's what I want to do about it. So you got to play with your voice in terms of that analogy of water as well, and see where you can really utilize that to your advantage. And as you're being water, again, is that over the time and over and under and around and through, I can't emphasize enough that the one thing that water never does is stop moving. That is resilience. You are going to need resilience as a leader who uses your voice. People aren't going to like it all the time. There are going to be people who don't agree with you. There are going to be people who don't like what you have to say. There are going to be people who want you to stay in your lane. And you are going to be making decisions with every conversation about where your values are and how you want to put them in a practice to be the change that you want to start to influence. And there are sometimes consequences for raising your voice, which is why doing it so strategically is important. And it's why aligning yourself with other change makers who are aligned and doing it as a movement. One of the things that's been so heartening, as challenging as this year was, and the things that we've seen in the headlines, and the fact that a lot of this was a hashtag, it is more than a hashtag. There is a movement underway right now. And when I speak to the people of diverse backgrounds in my network who are valued relationships, they say, Erica, we had these relationships before I had those relationships before I had to start asking questions, thank goodness. And was able to talk to them. And I said, what do you see? And they said, this one feels different. This feels like there's a movement. This feels like there could be change. And I am seeing people in their 50s, in their 60s, in their 70s who are sharing their stories of diversity, of not being given opportunities, of having to fight for a place at the table, of not being treated equally. I didn't know that about them. I just see them as a very successful peer. I had no idea that they had those stories. And now they're starting to share them. And there's so much power in that because it allows us to learn. So that piece of leadership and action, that piece of an ongoing commitment, that piece of learning how to be comfortable, of flowing like water and figuring out that piece, put all of that together. and get really comfortable raising your voice now as an early leader, because it gets a lot harder later to change a habit. And all of this is the way you think, the way you engage, your communication strategies or habits. Make it part of who you are. Embody it into your leadership approach right now, starting today. And 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 40 years from now, when you're in a very different position, when you do have that org chart where you are wherever you wanted to be for your career, you'll look around and say, this is who I am. And I'm doing it in action. You have a lot of respect for yourself at the end of where you are. So really putting all those things into consideration. So I want to be respectful because we do have a couple more minutes left. So Nicole, I don't know if there's anything else that we wanted to hit upon. I'm looking to see if anyone, and for those of you who are here with us tonight, your biggest takeaway, was there a strategy that you heard tonight, or a mindset or a metaphor or something that you are going to commit to for yourself? I'd be really curious for those of you who are here with us right now tonight to put into the comments something that you are going to commit to as a leader. What are you committing to in terms of, I commit to raising my voice. I commit to continually developing the skills and my comfort levels to doing it. I commit to applying different strategies and getting more comfortable telling stories or using data, like something that you heard or understood tonight that you would like to commit to. And then I'm going to encourage you to also, when you get these slides, after Sarah and team send these out, along with the extra bonus tip, there's a bunch of strategies in there about my 5 top strategies and extra tips for you to consider, and then see if you can adapt at least 2 more strategies into your leadership toolkit. And Nicole, what else do you have for me tonight?
Okay, in the comments, we have Amanda saying the way, and she bolded way, it's on the screen now. The way you say things matters because it's 80% of communication. Yeah. And I do agree with that. I don't see any other comments. So let's see if anyone else has anything else to say in regards to all of the strategies and so forth that we've learned this evening. We have Asma. Her biggest takeaway is that you can still be a part of the change even if you are not in the highest position of power in your institution. You can still be passionate and implement change without approaching it in the wrong way.
Excellent. And it is so important to do so. And, if you think about, I'm only new here, my voice doesn't matter, that's not going to serve anybody, right? Like, not using your voice has a negative impact on budgets or on relationships. And at the same time, it really is about understanding the culture of where you work, getting a read on the situation, asking your questions, and really thinking and considering how can you make the change where you are now. And again, continually doing it and testing it out on the things that are less important, maybe don't have as much impact, so you can use those skills when they do. And I'm loved hearing this. So really changing by strategizing before speaking up, and then speaking up with confidence because you know that you're doing this. Now, again, some things are going to work and some things aren't. So try not to overthink it. Try it and then decide, give yourself some feed forward. What went really well? And I'm not going to say, what could I do better? I'm going to suggest you think about it. What can I do, or how would I do this differently? And maybe reflect upon a misunderstanding that's already happened. You've got to have had some misunderstanding. I mean, you're at this conference, you're seeing different pieces. What's a misunderstanding that's happened? Was it successfully navigated? Did it not go very well? What was done? What would you do differently? Or what would you have done differently if you were the one on the other side of the conversation? If you had been that leader who was speaking to you or doing things in that way, how would you have approached that same situation? Begin practicing your own leadership skills by putting yourself in that position of what worked well, what didn't work well, so that you can decide how you would do things the same or how you would do things differently moving forward. So it's very exciting tonight. I am just thrilled to be here tonight with all of you. And I want to thank all of you for being here. I'm going to also always encourage all of you to stay connected. If we're not already connected on Instagram or on LinkedIn, please do. I am constantly interested in seeing how your career pathways emerge and where you're going next. I'm a huge fan. And I have to say that every year when I come to this conference, I leave with so much hope and so much optimism about the positive changes that each of you have the power and the passion to make, because we need you and your voice more than ever. So stay connected, stay confident, raise that voice. And I look forward to all of the impact that every single one of you is going to have. So thank you guys so very much. Again, you'll get the slide deck and an extra tip sheet tomorrow. I think it'll be posted in the resources. I'm just doing one last check of the chat. See, Amanda, you're very welcome. Jesse, being water. Yes, be water, my friends. Go and be water. Okay. And by the way, don't forget to rate the session down below, please. There is a rating. Nikoi Diz, and we're looking at this as feedback and feed forward. I know that it was really great because it was shared with me last year, the comments you made about what really stuck with you, what you would like to see differently. And they developed this conference based on not only what they were seeing, but based on the evaluations and feedback. And we're always interested to see how can we make this even more beneficial for you each year. Okay. So with all of that said, I personally want to thank you. And Nikoi, thanks for being such a partner, a great partner in this, and ensuring that the comments and your questions and contributions made this as relevant as possible.
All right. I would like to thank you as well. Once again, thank you so much for this wonderful session. It did indeed give me a lot to think about. I'm sure it gave a lot of the other individuals in the room a lot to think about as well. Everyone will receive the slide deck, as Erica stated, from today, and a bonus tip sheet with different strategies on how to raise issues appropriately in a workplace that we could not get into within the hour. The Inclusive Leadership Conference would love to know your takeaways and what you thought. You can do so by rating the session down below, and you can understand that any feedback that you give and any insights that you give will always be helpful to ILC and even Erica. So give it up to her in the chat one more time for a wonderful session.
And I'll to you guys, yeah.
And don't forget to participate in the games and post on a wall to earn different prizes. I know for a fact that you won't want to miss out on them. Also follow us on your social media at TULeadership, also at Temple Diversity, and at KLEINGO on any social media platform. With that being said, that concludes our session this evening. Please make sure you meet us later this evening for our keynote on Comfortable Conversations with a Black Man with Emmanuel Ochko.
Well, that one's going to be powerful. I'm not missing that. All right. Well, sleep well, everybody. Enjoy.